stand here. Hi, everyone. Am I good to start? Okay, I think I will. So my talk here is on aligning decentralized communities. My name is Arnold. I'm the founder of a company called Lighthouse. We're a research lab with a mandate to accelerate the adoption of governance technology. So we are predominantly operating in the Ethereum ecosystem, but I met Dean on the Telegram channels, and he invited me to share some of the ideas that we have about governance. So a little bit of background about myself, and which will give you a bit of insight into how I think about things. Been a CTO for a while, lots of like old school complex systems, e-commerce, inventory management. I also had a bit of a stint in doing some AI before ChatGPT. And my entry into crypto was actually using the DAO structure as a means to conduct a hostile takeover on a failed ICO project. So with the DAO structure, I was able to recover a substantial amount of a treasury, put it into the hands of the community, and direct the project forward. And through that sort of process, I led over 30 proposals over a course of a year, and that was for a community of 100,000 users, and I deep dove into governance, and I got obsessed with it. Through that experience, I became passionate about creating trustless data-driven systems, and yeah, this is how we're going to sort of unpack a little bit of that. Now, before we get into the talk, I want to sort of highlight the opportunity that we have in the space for DAOs. For the first time in history on the macro level, DAOs have the opportunity to hold people accountable. And we can do this through governance and tokenized economies. But we are so far away from actually being able to translate this into something practical and pragmatic. Now, the future that I envision, DAO technology can be applied to councils, governments, but we are at least 3 to 5 years away from that. And to give some, real-world context, the amount of money that is being managed by DAO treasuries, on-chain treasuries at the moment, this was like 3 days ago, 30 billion. That's the EVM system. I don't know if they include Solana. It does? Okay, great. Thank you for that context. But yeah, which is wild. And, that's just going to grow and grow and grow. And, long tail, we do imagine, or I imagine, that the majority of LLCs will be replaced by DAOs, and how can we actually get to that point? Before we get into anything technical, I want to sort of present a mental model for how I think about governance, and this is something that my research lab thinks about. When people think about governance, most often they think about voting. But beyond voting, there's so many different things that affect and have a relationship with what gets eventually ratified. And part of, I guess, my mandate is to try and bring a lot of these different subsystems on-chain so we can have better tooling, better deliberation. So in how we think about governance at Lighthouse, we've kind of bucketed it into these 5 categories. We've got ideation, discourse, voting, allocation, and accountability. Little small descriptions there, but I'll unpack that a little bit further later on. And I'm just going to present a high-level agenda of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to present, my initial product, which is Lighthouse, what we do with it, a protocol, Signals, which is based on research that came from 2 years of developing Lighthouse, and also some supplementary research that I did over the break about this sort of new distribution mechanism called epoch-based emissions. So yeah, let's jump into Lighthouse. Now, if you recall, we created 5 buckets for how we think about governance, and this is a map of the territory. So in ideation and discourse, to be fair, they kind of share the same sort of tools at the moment. So most of the ideation and discourse in the crypto space takes place in Discord, Telegram, forums, Twitter, WhatsApp, and random websites. And as we know, none of that is on-chain. The majority of voting, we've got all these fragmented voting systems. I apologize, this is EVM-based. I would probably add in Realms and SPL governance in there as well. But even with this, even if we did want to support that, already there's like 6 or 7 different underlying voting mechanisms, so it's quite complex. And then when we look at the allocation category, so that's adjacent subsystems that are specifically designed to allocate capital beyond simply sending an amount of money to an individual. These types of protocols are designed as complex systems that take into account their validity and how we need to sort of, allocate capital for some sort of meaningful impact. And again, we see a huge diversity of experiments, and I'm sure they also exist in Solana as well. And when it comes to accountability, again, we don't really have much in the space at the moment. We've got Excel, and we've got a lovely individual called Zach XPT, which some of you may know, who, are crusaders for holding people accountable. So the takeaway from this is, when people think about governance, what do we think about voting? We think about voting, and voting is segregated across all these different buckets. So what we did with Lighthouse, we created a native iOS and Android app to sort of compose all these different systems so they can be delivered via a homogeneous interface for end users. Now, this is really important because for the first time, if you're a member of a DAO and you're participating in 3 or 5 different communities, no one literally has the time to read up on all the different proposals, keep up to date with the sort of nuances of what's happening in the community. And a lot of information, or the meta, is actually embedded in the on-chain comments that people put in. And that actually gets lost because when people vote, in order for you to actually surface or read the comment, you're gonna have to go into the blockchain and pull that out, and I'm sure that happens on Solana as well. So what we've done is we've tried to create an interface that is extremely familiar but narrow, with the purpose of highlighting what's going on, so that when you get a notification from Lighthouse, you know that it's important, it's about something that you care about, you probably have money invested in it in some fashion, and we're just trying to get you that information as quickly as possible. One of the cool things about this is because we're a native app, we've got a dedicated channel that people can, project leaders can contact you on. So we can actually do some pretty interesting things. So for example, if any of you guys recall the compound hack, where a advocate investor, no, I don't know how to describe him. So let's just say a malicious actor, put forward a proposal that would have effectively devalued the compound treasury. He put that in at the last minute. Because we had push notifications, we could have had some sort of software that did an early detection and alerted all the other stakeholders what was happening. And similarly, we can also alert people who are delegates or voters, hey, you haven't voted on this proposal, it's not reaching quorum, you should vote. So that's Lighthouse. Now, moving on to Signals. So Signals was born out of our, development of the product Lighthouse. Now, if we just lean back into our governance stack mental model, ideation and discourse, it's all off-chain. We have kind of no idea to sort of make decisions based on ideas that are presented across all these different mediums. So as an idea, we wanted to explore, what does it look like capturing these 2 streams on-chain? And that's how we developed Signals. Now, the problem space for Signals, so let's look at it. At the moment, everyone's chasing yields. So this is a kind of bad joke, it shows my age, but you can see all the usual suspects, the Chad, the bunch of stoners and other random influencers, talking about what to do. There's a lot of noise. People have low attention spans. Everyone's complaining about low participation. I say that in the sort of boomer speak, and we'll expand on that later. And people are really obsessed with DeFi primitives. So how can we take all these aspects and kind of create a protocol that does something interesting so we can incentivize more participation? So we came up with this sort of plan. We wanted DAO leaders to deploy what we call an on-chain bulletin board. And with that, they can sort of configure some properties, such as okay, when can people propose ideas? What are some thresholds for how many tokens you need to have in order to put it to the community for it to be considered? What is the threshold for it to be accepted? And we also wanted to sort of put in some DeFi, so there's a parameter for how fast something decays. I'll expand on that a little bit later. So when a bulletin board or a forum is deployed on-chain, DAO members, they can submit, not proposals, we call them initiatives because these are macro ideas, and they submit initiatives through the mechanism of locking their governance tokens. Now, this is actually quite interesting because we're giving governance tokens an additional utility, and it also has some other behavioral properties such as they're taken out of the voting supply potentially, and people need to be very considered when they make a choice. So we can configure a parameter such that, you know, maybe you're only allowed to lock tokens against one initiative, maybe there are 10 initiatives, and you have to actually pick between which one is most important to you. So what we're doing here is we're creating a sort of a game where I guess we have a ranked on-chain board of what is really important to the community. And because of all these compositions, I'm not going to go into the technical aspects of it, we get this like beautiful on-chain dynamically ranked idea board. So this is all kind of complex, and you know, when people use blockchains, it's already quite a challenge. So communicating this to the end user, we wanted to sort of like explore some of the sort of various ways to communicate these complex interactions. So say, for example, if you're a user in the DAO and you want to propose an initiative, you kind of want to know how much are my tokens going to contribute towards this idea? And so in the A line, that's the a million threshold that, you know, that initiative needs to be reached in order for that idea to move forward. B is, I guess, how much your current contribution is weighted against the principal. And that decay parameter that I was talking about before, that is just the rate in which that declines. So say, for example, if I lock it for, I don't know, 11 days, my principal starts off at 600,000 and then decays linearly over those days back to my original 100,000 principal. I think I may have messed it up, but forgive me. So yeah, why do we have this locking mechanism, right? So in order to sort of understand why we designed it this way, we need to look back to, I guess, how the majority of token allocations are made. Now, if you want to sort of like load it up and chuck it into a graph, most allocations will be heavily skewed and, you know, left skewed like this. So we wanted to sort of introduce the locking mechanism as a means to provide holders who have less tokens an ability to sort of form coalitions so they can have their voice heard. So what's really interesting about this is that for the first time, we think that, yeah, the people who have less holdings can actually have their voice amplified, and that may incentivize them to participate more in DAOs. This is how, I guess, the message board, the priority board looks like. It's very simple. At C, we just like highlight the very high level sort of configuration of the board that may change. And yeah, we just see a kind of like Reddit style list, and you can see how much support something may or may not have, how far it's tracking towards, you know, being accepted. And I think it's pretty interesting. Cool. So now I'm going to sort of move on to this sort of research piece that I've been working on. So if we, again, refer back to this left-skewed graphic where we see allocations being heavily skewed towards the left, this is actually something that was released quite recently, the Trump coin, and everyone's quite familiar with the standard, like, hey, we're going to launch a coin, look at this cool pie chart, but it actually translates to what we see on the left in practice when we actually do the math. So when people say DAOs don't work because there's low participation, that's why. So what I did over the break, I used a tool called CAD, which is a Python dynamical systems modeling tool. And I wanted to sort of explore the idea of like, well, how can we actually do better distributions for DAOs with the goal of saying that, with the thesis that if we have a better distribution, does that mean that we have, you know, better outcomes and alignment? So I was able to prove that if we do release tokens in smaller batches, and we reduce insider allocations over time, it actually leads to a very mathematical, concrete decentralization. So I'm going to expand on this, and sorry if it's a bit like crazy, but the general premise of the idea is that with that same sort of pie chart that we see, we actually sort of still borrow that sort of like familiar model, and we just like reduce those allocations over time depending on what type of narrative we want to sort of fulfill. And as we know, as projects sort of evolve over time, the needs of the project also change. We have members leaving, we have members joining, we have new things that we need to consider. And for the most part, when we generate all these tokens at the start, no one knows what's going on. So as a result of the modeling, I was able to use some statistical sort of measures to sort of understand if we actually do achieve some sort of decentralization. So one of these measures, which is used in modeling, is the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of economic inequality. So, using that method that I proposed, we could see with all the various different narratives that some people may want to sort of communicate, hey, we are a balanced, decentralized community, or we really care about the community, or we're an institutional project. How does that actually translate to distribution over time? And we find that if we do stagger emissions, that overall does lead to better decentralization. And for jokes, I put in the Trump allocation and how that decentralizes over time, and it doesn't, so yeah. So another sort of measure that I was really interested in exploring was this thing called the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, the pronunciations on the right. And this is a metric that is typically used to understand the competitiveness of a market. So a highly simplified example would be, imagine 4 airlines. The first 2 airlines have, 30 and 30% market share, and the others have less. This sort of metric is used to understand the sort of concentration of the market. So if we apply that same sort of like market-based concentration to the different stakeholders that we have, so if I just like pluck out this progressive decentralized narrative that I've talked about, we can see that at epoch 1, like the people who are investing, their sort of concentration of power decreases over time. And that makes sense, right? Because at the start of a project, you need capital, you need people who are taking risk. But at later stages, so say, for example, if we look at the end user line, we want them to have more power and more say in how the system is operating. So this is something that's pretty interesting to me. I've got all the modeling. If you guys are interested in any of this stuff, contact me later and I can share the code with you. And yeah, that was the research piece that we did at Lighthouse. So just to recap, and some takeaways for this conversation. At Lighthouse, we believe that governance activities should be delivered to where the users are, on mobile. Governance tokens are a ripe space for additional experimentation, and they can be given additional utility to drive further engagement within your community. And it is possible to launch tokens with a pathway to actual decentralization. That's me. You can follow me on Twitter. That's probably the best place because I'm just posting all over the place. But yeah, thank you.
Any questions?
Have you seen a quadratic voting for the number 3? Maybe that's another way to do things with a low or high token holdings.
Yeah, I mean, quadratic voting is definitely a good measure, and if anything, that just dampens the amplification of the vote. It doesn't actually solve the initial allocation problems. So quadratic voting, in my opinion, would be a band-aid to structural inequality already. So we're trying to sort of rewind and fix that a little bit earlier on.
I had a question around for signals. One of my pet peeves with Discord or Telegram or discourse where people are discussing things is you have no idea how many tokens the person has that's voicing their opinion. in fact, I find that some of the most vocal hold like, 2 tokens, like,
Yeah.
50 cents worth of a token, whereas, the person who has $100,000 worth is just going with the flow. How do you seek to solve something like that, where you understand the skin in the game?
Yeah, so that's basically on the board configuration. So in order to propose an idea, you already have skin in the game because you need to hold this minimum amount of tokens to put that forward. Now, beyond that, I think if you have 1 or 2 tokens and you want to comment or shoot on that proposal, you can be there in the comments, but you know that the people who are proposers have some sort of skin in the game. And that's going to be dynamic from DAO to DAO. We don't know what that is, but as long as we have the tools to be able to do that. And I think one of the interesting things is, like, at least in the communities that I've participated in, we do need to gate outsiders because there is a culture of brigading where people from additional communities come in and try and sow discord and chaos in your community. So it's important to actually protect against that.
So I guess, that leads me to a follow-up question. I don't know how much you know about futarchy.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of it? Do you think it has?
Do I think it has? I think it has merit, but I think it has merit in very specific applications. So there is an interesting experiment that was announced a couple of days ago, and it's going to be run by Optimism and Uniswap, and they are going to be running Futaki specifically, but only for the election of council members, which I think is an interesting application because that's a human psychological thing that the market is going to be responding to, as opposed to something concrete and technical. So I'm going to look forward to seeing the results of that experiment. In terms of Futaki as a means to make decisions for technical outcomes, I think that's very dangerous. And I would sort of just heed caution before we start applying that to on-chain. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.